Oh my God.
A news helicopter crashes just feet from the Space Needle, igniting a giant fireball. Pilot Gary Fitzner and photojournalist Bill Strothman are killed. A third person seriously hurt.
This is fuel! Stay away from the fuel! Get back!
Witnesses from a nearby construction site helped to contain the flaming jet fuel flowing from the crash as firefighters battle the flames. Tonight, the FAA and the NTSB are on scene, beginning their investigations. We have all the angles covered tonight.
We'll take a closer look at the lives of the two men who died and a reaction from City Hall. But we begin with King 5's Chris Daniels with more on what happened. Chris.
Good evening tonight from outside Fisher Plaza, where just a few minutes ago we saw the wreckage from this TV news helicopter get carted out of here by salvage crews. They also took 3 different vehicles, a truck and 2 cars that were involved in this accident earlier this morning. We can tell you, frankly, this is a story that hits close to home for many of us in the news business. The Como chopper crew had just finished chasing a story and was on to its next assignment when that helicopter sputtered and fell to the ground.
Oh my God, this helicopter just crashed right in front of us. Oh, he's gone. Oh my God.
That voice you hear is Bo Bain.
This is fuel! Stay away from the fuel! Get back!
The panic in his voice, a measurement of what the construction worker had just witnessed.
When he went to take back off, the sound of the helicopter changed kind of drastically, and I looked, and the helicopter was almost immediately pitched sideways and off balance, and he kind of just nose dove over the trees and clipped the top of the trees and crashed just on the other side of the street there.
The Como News helicopter had just taken off from Fisher Plaza, and employees say it made an immediate descent right into oncoming traffic.
We heard the chopper rotors. We heard the noise of a problem, and then we heard the explosion.
Bear with us, okay?
The chopper damaged a truck and 2 cars, hurt 3 victims on the ground.
A man crawled out from under the door of the car on his hands and knees, came out, and he was still on fire. And one of my colleagues rushed over there and brought him to the ground amidst all the debris that was in the street, and started patting out the fire.
Oh my God.
That man is now being treated by doctors at Harborview after an accident.
Get away from the vehicles!
That made an otherwise routine morning.
Oh my God.
Memory. Bo Bain, who you just heard from and was at that adjacent construction site, still had the presence of mind to stop and try and find sandbags to help stop that flow of fuel down Broad. And you can see crews at this hour still working to clean all of that up. Seattle's mayor closed 4 different buildings here at the Seattle Center to allow that to happen today, and also to mourn the victims. Live tonight outside Fisher Plaza, Chris Daniels, King 5 News.
Thank you, Chris. The crash site is expected to be closed to traffic until 9 o'clock tonight. No vehicles will be allowed on Broad Street between Denny Way and 5th Avenue North and Thomas Streets near Mercer. This is in front of Como TV and the Seattle Center. We will let you know when those roads reopen. That is one of the busiest areas in the city, and at that time of day, there are workers, tourists, and commuters all over. It happened right in front of many of them. King 5's Gary Chittum spent the morning getting their stories. Gary.
Well, Dennis, you would be hard-pressed to find a busier part of the city right now with all of these busy office buildings here. And then, of course, on just about every corner, you've got construction projects with all those workers. And then right across the street, you have one of the most popular tourist attractions on the West Coast. So there were a lot of eyes on this when it went down.
And then all of a sudden I could see it just nosedive right into the cars.
It was just crashing, and it hit the red car, and it tilted at 90 degrees, and it broke into several pieces, and it burst into flames 2 seconds later.
I ran over there, but it was like already burst into flames, and you could only get within like 20 feet.
Finally, the guy in the red car came out, and he was bleeding. His head was bleeding, and his shirt was a little bit on fire.
There wasn't much anyone could do. Cell phone video captures the early moments of the crash when the streets were still ablaze and the fire and the police crews came in. As they put out the fire, witnesses tried to catch their breath. And reality set in for co-workers of the victims. But they had a story to tell. Their chance to grieve came between live shots and sound bites. It's a story with no ending for them. And it's a disaster they shared with the news community and a busy neighborhood.
It makes you cherish every bit of part of your life that you have. Like I said, it just made me think about my daughter. I'm like, wow. This is
people just driving to work, and next thing you know, a helicopter's landing on you.
Yeah, a lot of people in this neighborhood are feeling it. They've been listening to these helicopters take off and land in this area for a very long time. It's something they've grown accustomed to, and a lot of them like to look up and watch it take off and land. So obviously it's going to be a hard time for a lot of people around here. Reporting live in Seattle, Gary Chinook, King 5 News.
Thank you, Gary. For the Como crew, it started out as a routine morning. 5:30 a.m., the helicopter took off from its base in Renton. By 6 o'clock, it was over a water main break in Covington. It returned to Como to refuel around 7:40 a.m. Moments later, as the helicopter was taking off for Renton, it crashed. The question is, why? King 5's aviation specialist Glenn Farley is live at the scene tonight. Glenn, what will officials be looking at, and when might we know the specifics?
That may be a year before we know the specifics. In 5 days, we'll get a preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board, but that's really going to be just a sort of a factual recap of what we know to that point. The real answer's a long way off, but there are some tantalizing details. The helicopter was rotating around in a counterclockwise direction, and then there's that engine whine. A National Transportation Safety Board investigator looks into the hollow emptiness of the tail boom, because somewhere in the wreckage, somewhere in some cell phone or security camera video, there are pieces that will add up to an answer.
Witness described as the helicopter lifted off from the building and began to rotate counterclockwise and subsequently crash.
Bo Bain is one of those witnesses, used to the sound of helicopters landing and taking off, but this time it was different.
You could definitely hear there was something wrong. Something sounded different with the helicopter. That's what made me look at it in the first place.
The aircraft is a Eurocopter A-Star 350, assembled in Texas in 2003, a company now known as Airbus Helicopter. The aircraft is owned by Helicopters Incorporated, commonly called Heli Inc., one of the largest companies that leases media helicopters in the U.S. And this particular aircraft has been used in other cities, including Boston. The aircraft's history, just one thing investigators will study.
Right now, the maintenance records are en route to us. We should receive those this evening. The operator of the helicopter keeps those records on the East Coast. They're being flown out at this time.
Everything will be looked at, from any influence construction cranes had in the area to the weather to the pilot's experience and training. And every little piece could hold an important clue. Now that noise that you're hearing is actually a Vector truck. They are actually trying to clean off the street there because it has been so badly burned by the jet fuel that burned here for so long earlier this morning, less than 12 hours ago. So the NTSB's process is this. It's a process of elimination. They'll go through the boxes. Was it the weather? Probably not. Air traffic control, obviously not involved. Can they find out anything in the maintenance records? Heli Inc. has a good reputation. They may check that off. So we'll see where this goes, but it may take quite a while. Live in downtown Seattle, Glenn Farley, King 5 News.
Thank you, Glenn. We here at King 5 have a news sharing agreement with Como on the use of the chopper. We share the cost of the helicopter and video service provided by the independent contractor Helicopter Incorporated. All of us here at King would like to express our condolences. We may be competitors, but we work next to each other, covering our community. And at the end of the day, we are all colleagues in this together. King 5's General Manager Ray Heacock said today, words cannot express the sympathy and sadness we feel for the victims who lost their lives in today's tragedy and for their families. We grieve this afternoon with the entire Seattle community, and our thoughts are with all those affected. Helicopters Inc. also released this statement this afternoon. On behalf of the Helicopters, Inc. family, I would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the families of those lost and injured in Seattle today. We mourn their loss and suffering, and our thoughts and prayers are with them.
Many of the tourist attractions in the Seattle Center were closed today out of respect for those killed in this morning's crash. The closure includes the Space Needle, monorail, and the EMP. The closure is understandable since the crash site is near the Seattle tourist attraction. Again, those attractions will remain closed for the rest of the day.
Witnesses saw one of the survivors pull himself from the wreckage while he was on fire.
He suffered serious burns and is now at Harborview Medical Center. King 5's Alyssa Hahn joining us now live with the latest on his injuries and treatment. Alyssa?
Lori, doctors upgraded 38-year-old Richard Newman of Seattle to serious condition this afternoon. He was that person who caught on fire when the helicopter came crashing down, and he was rushed here to Harborview. We're told he suffered burns to 20% of his body, mostly to his lower back and the back of one of his arms. The burns are 2nd to 3rd degree and will likely require surgery. He also suffered a broken rib and some cuts to his head. The spokesperson here at Harborview talked to us today about how the news on his condition improved throughout the day.
He came in critical. We didn't know for sure how deep the burns were, how much of his body was covered, and I think the good news is, you know, he's got less of his body burned. He's young. He's in a good place. He's at the Level 1 Burn and Trauma Center for 4 states that does this and has the volumes to do this and has really good outcomes. So he's in a really good place. A lot of good support from the family, and I think a lot of support from the community about what's happened to him.
Newman's family is here at Harborview. They are from the Bellingham area. We're told that his partner is here with him as well. Harborview says their priority is to keep these wounds clean, to make sure he has enough fluids, and at some point in the days coming forward, they'll make a decision about surgery. Reporting live at Harborview, Alyssa Hahn, King 5 News.
Thank you, Alyssa. Governor Jay Inslee released a written statement offering his condolences to the KOMO TV staff, saying despite the personal impacts of this tragedy, the KOMO staff have been reporting on this loss with impressive professionalism and grace. Our hearts go out to you. The governor says he hopes for the best for those who were injured.
Among the 2 men killed, the photojournalist who left his mark on Seattle and on KOMO TV. A master of his craft, storytelling was what he loved to do. It's what he was doing this morning. From the passenger seat of the news helicopter, King 5's Meg Coyle joins us now with more on the life of Bill Strothman.
Yeah, Dennis, Bill Strothman was so kind. That's the one word people have used over and over today that we've talked to describe him. He spent 28 years at KOMO, and even though he had technically retired, he was still working part-time as the eyes of Air 4. He was well loved by those who knew him, well respected by those who worked with him.
When the news broke and the fiery pictures showed up on her screen.
And I knew Bill worked the morning shift. And
so April Zepeda texted him and called him.
Just switched right over, you know, where it doesn't ring. And I called his house, and it just started beginning to feel really dark really fast. I had a bad idea.
She would soon learn her longtime friend, co-worker, confidant, photojournalist Bill Strothman was gone. A man who had spent his career covering the news had become the news.
It leaves such a hole in my heart, and but it doesn't even compare, I know, to what his family's going through.
April worked with Bill for 11 years at KOMO, 4 of those in their North Bureau.
When I picture him in my mind, it's always like this, with the camera on his shoulder. And
to say he was good at his job would be an understatement. He was incredible. So accomplished was Bill that he won 13 Emmys. He was KOMO's chief photographer, where he was also named National Press Photographers Association's Regional Photographer of the Year. So impressive and inspiring to other photojournalists.
Okay.
We turned the camera on one of our own.
He used his talent as a photographer, plus his ability to listen, to get people to be comfortable and tell great stories.
King 5 photojournalist Eric Wold has known Strothman for 20 years, often covering the same stories.
I missed him when he left the North Bureau, when he retired from shooting day-to-day news, and I'll miss him even more now.
This is an Emmy that I won with Bill because of his great shooting.
Yet despite all the awards and accolades,
that he had such an amazing skill and a great eye, but he was an even better man.
A family man That was the job he lived for.
I'm positive he was thinking of Nora, Heidi, and Dan in those final moments. I just know it. I know it.
And son Dan followed in his dad's footsteps. He now works as a photographer at Como. Bill Strothman is also survived by his wife Nora and daughter Heidi. Coming up at 7 o'clock, we will hear from Bill's family as they mourn a man who was the center of their universe. Lori.
Thank you, Meg. The pilot at the controls this morning was also a longtime Boeing employee. Gary Fitzner worked at the development center in Tukwila and in his spare time flew helicopters and gave flying lessons. King 5's Rob Piercy is live in Renton tonight with reaction from a close friend.
Lori, we are across the airfield from where Fitzner would fly out in the mornings that he was piloting. Everyone around here was too shaken up by what happened to talk, but we did talk with a very close friend from Boeing who told me we lost a good one today.
He was just a hell of a nice guy, hell of a good guy.
Having a conversation he never could have imagined before today, Don Anderson tried to find the words.
Yeah, you always think you're strong, but somehow or another it didn't work.
For more than 20 years, he worked with Gary Fitzner at Boeing. Don, an engineer, Gary, a technician.
So if you want to get something done, you go to the technicians. You know, you don't go to another engineer. You're not going to get anything done there.
They traveled the world together for work. Spain, Germany, France. They always found time to explore during their trips.
Gary was just great to be with. He was, happy. He wanted to do stuff.
Most of all, he says, Gary loved to fly, and he was good at it too.
Taking classes about what might happen if you're going to have an incident in a helicopter.
It's why Don couldn't believe it this morning when the emails and phone calls came flooding in. Gary's helicopter had crashed. He called Gary's wife.
She said, yes, the rumor's true. I don't know what to do.
While the circumstances of what happened are sorted out, Don says one thing is clear.
If he was checking anything and thought there's a problem, I don't think he'd even fly it.
A skilled pilot and Boeing technician, and most importantly to Don, a friend.
It was just fun to be with him, to be at his place and to do things with him. And you don't have that opportunity anymore. It's gone.
Fitzner's family released a statement today saying that he planned to retire from Boeing soon, but he did have plans to continue flying. Coming up tonight on King 5 News at 7, you'll see how Don Anderson plans to memorialize his friend. Live tonight in Renton, Ron Piercy, King 5 News.
Thank you, Rob. Back in 2005, an Airlift Northwest helicopter crashed while taking off from the roof of a hospital in Olympia. The pilot walked away without injury. Moments before the accident, the pilot received a low rotor audio warning, meaning the blades were not turning fast enough.
7 years ago, 2 television helicopters crashed in Phoenix, killing 4 people. The mid-air crash happened while 5 Phoenix television news helicopters were covering a police chase. The KTVK and KNXV helicopters collided and crash-landed in a park. Both sets of pilots and photographers died in that crash. Both the Federal Aviation Administration and National Transportation Safety Board stated the probable cause of the crash, both pilots' failure to see and avoid the other helicopter.
We will continue to track this story all evening long, including more live reports in our next half hour. And for updates anytime, go to our website, king5.com.
Part of that continuing coverage comes in our next half hour. Because of this crash, could the city change its policies on landing pads in Seattle?
Plus, he was a fixture at King 5 for many years. Remembering Jim Compton, coming up.
6 years and done. The man who runs the state ferry says he's through. More on the surprise announcement next.
Clouds are rolling in throughout western Washington. We'll see how soon the rain will follow and how long it's going to stick around. I forecast just a couple of minutes from now.
And tonight we'll be sharing condolence messages that are pouring in about today's helicopter tragedy. King 5 News returns after this. A shocker in the state's transportation system today. The director of the state ferry system abruptly resigned after 6 years on the job.
King 5 investigator Susanna Frame broke the story today, and she joins us with the latest.
Lori and Dennis, even the top ferry brass were blown away today when their boss, David Mosley, announced he's calling it quits. Mosley says it was his decision alone to leave the system's top post and that he was not forced out. He says one of his greatest accomplishments was getting more boats built for the fleet. Mosley found himself in the spotlight more than any ferry director before him because of the King 5 investigation, Waste on the Water. Our 2010 series exposed millions of wasted tax dollars at the state ferries and employees gaming the system to boost their salaries. Mosley says he loved the job, but won't miss it.
I think I have chosen the right time. You know, I've loved every moment of it. It's been a great ride for 6 years. I'm ready to go.
Mosley says he's not retiring, but he doesn't know what the next chapter of his professional life will be. The Secretary of Transportation is in charge of getting a replacement on board. She says they will launch a national search to do that. And I have to say, I've interviewed David Mosley so many times. Usually, well, never a happy story on his end, right? A lot of tough questions in interviews, but he was always a gentleman, always answered the questions, and always said yes to an interview.
All right. Susanna, thank you.
Thanks, Susanna. Now we remember Jim Compton, the former Seattle City Councilman and distinguished journalist. Jim passed away last night from apparent natural causes. He was 72 years old. Jim hosted the Compton Report on King TV in the 1980s and 90s.
The discovery of a skull and a skeleton beside the Columbia River last year has sparked a scientific dispute that could upset all our ideas about who first inhabited the Pacific Northwest.
What a career he had. Jim's work at King earned him a dozen Regional Emmy Awards and a Columbia DuPont Award. He began his career as a radio news reporter in Portland before joining King TV in the 1960s. He later worked as a foreign correspondent for NBC News and returned to King in the 80s. Jim served on the Seattle City Council from 1999 to 2006.
Ukraine's new government says Russian President Vladimir Putin is a threat to the whole world. Today, Putin signed a treaty which annexes Ukraine's Crimea region into Russia. Russians in Red Square cheered the annexation, and Putin, who's now claiming Crimea has always been a part of Russia. U.S. and European officials are speaking out about it. While visiting Poland today, Vice President Joe Biden promised there would be more sanctions against Russia. Biden says the U.S. is committed to defending its allies. Poland shares a border with Russia.
Amtrak and Northline Sounder service remain down between Seattle and Everett because of recent landslides. Alternate transportation with chartered buses is being provided between Seattle and Everett and will cover all missed stops. The tracks are expected to reopen on Thursday.
The clouds have moved in. Will rain come along with them? Jeff Redder's forecast is next.
And as we continue our coverage of today's helicopter crash, we'll take a look at the company that leased the news chopper to Como and to King. That's new at 5:30.
I guess you could call this a typical spring day.
We're almost to spring.
It's still winter. It's still winter, though
yes,
we're closing in on spring rapidly. Still, I think the skies today probably mirrored the mood of many of us today. Lots of gray skies hanging over much of western Washington, but only producing a little bit of rain. If we go to time-lapse on radar, you'll see some of that pushing through the Strait of Juan de Fuca. If we zoom in a little bit tighter, you'll see some light to moderate showers approaching the Port Angeles Squim area. And I know Squim, it never rains in your city, but radar does suggest otherwise this time. Rainfall amounts heaviest out along the coast as expected, 44/100ths of an inch of rain at Oahu. Pacific Beach, 17/100ths of an inch of rain, and over the Puget Sound area, best chance of getting some measurable rain is expected. Generally Everett northward, and 8/100ths of an inch of rain fell at James Monroe Elementary. At SeaTac, only trace amounts. Today's high 50, below the average high of 54. And the low this morning, 39 degrees. This view from our Seattle Tower campfront on the waterfront. Current temperature, 50 degrees, northerly winds at 2. Barometric pressure beginning to diminish. And that's a suggestion a system's going to move in. The rain that we've had last night and today decreasing tree pollen down to just very low levels. Grass and weed pollen, as we've mentioned before, we're not in that season yet. Up in the mountain passes, looks bare and dry at Snoqualmie. And in fact, State DOT says there are a few wet spots, but that's about it. Largely the same at Stevens and White Pass, though there are a few icy patches at Stevens. Do take an eye, take it easy. Satellite pictures, you see the increasing band of clouds. Warm front approaching the north end of Vancouver Island, not generating a lot of rain. But as the cold front extending from that and from this low sweeps in, mainly tomorrow morning, that's when we're going to see increasing rain. Get a sense of that if we take a look at accumulated rainfall. Not much tonight or tomorrow except from Everett northward, but by 10:30, certainly spreading into the Puget Sound area, changing to showers with a slight chance of thunder showers in the afternoon. Overnight lows tonight, mildest near the Sound, low to mid-40s. Very similar northwest of Everett, upper 30s to low 40s elsewhere. Now daytime highs tomorrow, upper 40s to around 50. Chance of ice pellet or thunder showers from Arlington down to Marysville and possibly down to about Linwood, but also some afternoon sun breaks. Central and South Sound, mid-40s to around 50. The coolest temperatures along or near the Cascade foothills. Upper 40s to around 50 along the ocean beaches. Winds getting strong in the afternoon, moderate over the Puget Sound area, 10 to 25, 20 to 40 through the Strait. East of the Cascades, either rain or a mix of rain and snow from Wenatchee to Omak and Spokane. Mountain passes, probably 2 to 6 inches, especially the higher passes. Showers and sun breaks Thursday, slight chance of an ice pellet shower, but Friday, Saturday, Sunday look dry, partly sunny, warming up. Monday could hit 60. Too bad we couldn't slide that back into the weekend. But
That
overall,
would be nice.
an improving trend after tomorrow.
Okay, Jeff, thanks.
Coming up next on King 5 News at 5, continuing coverage of the crash of the Como News helicopter near the Space Needle.
I'm Linda Brill, live in Seattle. How many helicopters are flying around the city? Where did they take off? Where did they land? We have the story coming up.
And what, if anything, can federal investigators tell us about what happened? A timeline for answers when we return. Community, of course, responding with an outpouring of sympathy. That's Roger and Cindy Quering leaving flowers outside the Como TV studios. Cindy's message that they're thinking about the families and the people who work at the station, and they are sorry for their loss.
After the crash, the mayor said the city will review its policy on helicopter landing pads in Seattle. There are nearly a dozen heliports in the city. King 5's Linda Brill is live and got one on top of our building with the story. Linda.
Well, Dennis, we're on the roof now of the Dexter Avenue North King TV building, and this is Sky King's helipad, and it's been in operation for decades. But if you look to the west, about a third of a mile as the crow flies, that's where you'll see Como's helipad, and then just a few blocks from that is Cairo's helipad, all of them very close to the Space Needle. And now the mayor wants to take a look at those downtown helipads for a review. You may have seen Sky King take off and land on the King television building. It's just blocks away from the Como helicopter pad. Close to the crowded Seattle Center and the Space Needle, are these helicopter pads too close to Seattle's biggest tourist attractions?
We're going to look at the investigation from the NTSB, and then we will review our own policies based on that investigation and based on just growth and the changes that have happened.
In the 1960s, helipads were built in the city for private use for high-rise executives. In the 1980s, the rules changed. Now, Paul Ellen uses a floating helipad. Currently, helicopters are allowed downtown and in some commercial and industrial zones, but only for medical and media use. Harborview Medical Center has 3. Children's Hospital has 1. Getting a permit for a new helipad in Seattle today would be very difficult.
Now downtown, there's a lot more people living as well as working, and my guess is that the review would be perhaps challenging.
And the mayor says he has no intention at this point of closing down any of the helipads in Seattle until the investigation is over and his review is complete. In Seattle, Linda Brill, King 5 News.